Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this Matters of Fate video I'm going to be talking about the GM's role in a typical game of Fate. Now there's an awful lot of stuff to cover here, so I'm actually going to break down this section into a few bite-sized videos just so you can watch the little bits that interest you in particular and you're not having to watch through an entire 2-hour long video just to get to the bit that you want. So first of all, one of the main responsibilities of a GM is determining when a scene ends so that a new one can begin in a game. Now whilst the Fate RPG allows the GM to share a lot of the narrative control with their players, the final arbiter is the GM. Controlling when a scene ends and begins determines the pace of your session. It's important for a game because if a scene takes too long, the game will start to run out of steam. There'll be a lot of long pauses. Players will be tapping their fingers and shrugging at each other. Whereas if it's too short, then there'll be lots of elements in a scene left unexplored, and people might just feel a little bit shortchanged. The best advice that I can offer in this regard is that if a scene starts feeling like it's going nowhere, or the players seem to have exhausted all of their ideas, then just make a clean break, cut to the next scene and move on. After all, any plot elements that have not been picked up can always be tweaked and reused in future. As a GM, you will also be responsible for playing the rest of the people that populate your campaign world, not to mention the monsters, cyborgs and various other nasties. You also decide how the world reacts to things that the PCs do. The players, of course, decide their characters' actions, and the dice might determine success or failure, but the GM determines how the campaign world reacts. For example, a player decides that his thief is going to scale a building and leap from roof to roof to evade a guard walking below. But if they fail on the roll, it will be the GM who decides whether they fall, whether the guards hear them, etc. Handily, Fate does provide some assistance in this regard, offering guidelines how to create your campaign world and your game. We've talked a bit about that in an earlier video, but I'll be talking a little bit more about the GM's specific role in further videos in this series. The main aspect mechanic can also be an absolute godsend to the prospective Fate GM, providing you with clear guidelines how the players expect the world to respond to their character. Example, this could be something as simple as a character having an aspect on the run from the Thieves Guild, which tells you not only do they expect there to be a Thieves Guild in your game and in your campaign world, but they expect them to be actively pursuing the player character. Or it could be something a little more complex, like world-class archer. Now you might be wondering why I've said world-class archer is a more complex in my opinion. Well, if someone is a world-class archer, then they're not going to miss a shot due to simply not being good enough. Now, after all, aspects in Fate are always true. Everyone has an off day, but under ideal conditions, a world-class archer wouldn't miss with a bow that much. Dice are fickle though, and it's more than possible for our William Tell wannabe to roll poorly. How this failure manifests in the campaign world is very much up to the GM. To give you an example of this, if you contrast the following. So the GM says, okay, so roll to shoot an arrow at the Shogun's personal guard as he marches towards you. The player picks up his dice, rolls it, and then goes, oh no, it's a terrible roll. The GM then responds by saying, you shoot an arrow at the advancing guard, and you miss. Now, strictly speaking, this gets across everything that you need to say, but in addition to not being very dramatic, it gives the impression that the miss occurred because our player character was not skillful enough, despite being world class, which, as we've said earlier, aspects are always true in Fate, so he definitely is. Whereas if we say something more along the lines of, you let fly your arrow at the guard, but at the last moment he ducks to one side and it whistles over his head. Or perhaps even, you blink the rainwater out of your eyes as you try and aim your shot, but in the darkness of the stormy night your arrow goes wide. These two options still result in a fail and convey the same result in terms of the system, but they don't make it seem as though the PC failed through just a plain old lack of skill. It's very important as a GM to think about the way you phrase the reactions of your campaign world to the players in your game to convey the right message. However, Fate does help you out with this through the use of the aspects. If you're ever in doubt about how an action related to a particular player character should be described, first of all, I'd always advise you to look at their aspects. Have a look through them, see what the core crux of that character is. After all, that's what aspects are. Those are the things that are most important to that player character. And once you've done that, tailor your descriptions accordingly. So I hope you've enjoyed this short Matters of Fate video. You'll consider subscribing to our channel and clicking on the link up there. Until we see you in the next video, take care. If you have any comments, as always, put them in the comments box down below or hit me up in the Google Plus links. Happy gaming!